Well, hello everyone. My name is Siege, and joining me today is CM Trismegistus. Uh, how would you like to introduce yourself, CM?
Hello, everyone. It's good to see you all. I am. I would say I started a left-hand path person, and now I'm doing a bit more right-hand path stuff. So I just kind of go by Mystic nowadays.
Mystic, like as in call you Mystic,
Yeah, I
or
identify
that's
more as a mystic.
okay. Cool, cool. Um, so the reason I brought CM on with me is because he mentioned how he's a Freemason, and I have to admit I'm a bit ignorant on the subject. So I'd love to learn all about it. Um, So, I guess to start, what is Freemasonry?
Yeah, so famously, as we say, Freemasonry is a system of morality that is veiled in allegory and illustrated through symbols. So it definitely has a very big mystical bent to it. It is not very open with compared to other traditions that we might say in the East, for example, with being more straight to the point with their esoteric teaching. Rather, this I think system is fair to say that it tries to aim the initiate towards the mysteries and to finding the answers for themselves.
Hmm, interesting. How long has Freemasonry been around?
What answer do you want to hear? Some argue
Whatever
it's
answer you want to give.
some
Whatever answer
argue
you want to give.
that
Sorry.
no, it's all good. Some argue that Adam was the first Freemason, but if
Hmm.
we're talking more historically, we can trace its lineage back to the stone guilds of Europe, where in uh, around the Middle Ages or so, and even before you could argue, like the time of the Romans, freedom of association wasn't really much a thing, and so people who were very skilled artisans and skilled in a particular field would often be afforded a little bit more special privileges than the common folk, just because of the value that they brought in to the kingdom or whatever, right? Um, so it wouldn't be uncommon then that with this kind of freedom of association, then kind of came the more deeper studies on more esoteric topics. But we can definitely trace contemporary Freemasonry to the stone guilds of Europe, where they would have what are called lodges. And these stonemasons would work at a given craft site, and they would have a local lodge usually. And again, I'm not the greatest on historical Freemasonry. I'm just kind of given what I definitely am familiar with, kind of broad strokes. And then in these local lodges, basically, they would have education and stuff that these members would go through. And then as you might be familiar, Freemasonry is pretty notorious for having secret handshakes and passwords and so on and so forth, right? And we believe this is traced back to when these lodges would give education to the members of the lodges, and they each kind of denoted what skill level you were at, so that when you traveled to, say, another city or to another country or whatever, right? If there was a local stone guild that you went to, which there almost usually was, um, you would have, the passwords and the whatever, right, to signify you are who you say you are. And so then we kind of skip forward a little bit to about the 1700s, where in England at the time there were two main contemporary branches of Freemasonry as we know them today. This, if you want to call it proto Masonry, I don't think many brothers of mine would agree with that phrasing, but I'll just kind of stick with that terminology for now. this kind of denotes the history before the first Grand Lodge of Freemasons, right? So by this time, there weren't that many people actually doing stone cutting, like actually working with tools and laying the stone for cathedrals and whatever, right? By this time, it was mostly wealthy patrons of the local area that were becoming members to kind of keep the lodge afloat. And by that time, like I said, there weren't many, if at all, people who were actually working in the stonemason profession. And now it was mostly these people who called themselves speculative Freemasons, right? Or speculative Masons, right? Um, and so these people then were more turning the actual craft of stonemasonry into a more speculative form, where then instead of working with actual stone, you were now working with more higher intellectual side of things. So instead of working the stone, you are now shaping yourself, right? You are now
Mm.
building your morals. You have tools that you inherit the lessons of how the traditional stonemasons would use them, but now you are shown how to go beyond to apply this to working on yourself, right? And then, like I said, in the 1700s, we then come to the kind of main split that was between what are called the ancients and the modern Masons. Now, the naming is actually a little deceiving because the ancients technically trace their lineage to after the moderns do. Again, I'm not very familiar with the nitty gritty of each, but essentially, there were more or less two versions of Freemasonry at the time. And they didn't recognize each other at all. So if you were a member of the ancients, right, the moderns wouldn't recognize you at all. And likewise, if you were a modern, the ancient lodges wouldn't recognize you, right? And so, in order to heal this rift, they formed the first Grand Lodge in London at a pub called the Goose and Gridiron.
Mm.
Um, and this kind of set a constitutional standard for how people could uh, participate together, and they had like agreed upon ritual, agreed upon practices, right? And interestingly enough, Canada had a lot to do with how we understand contemporary Freemasonry in North America. Um, so the in my jurisdiction, we have two, what we call Canadian Rite and York Rite. But these rites trace their lineage back to the moderns and the ancients, right? So in Canada at that time, around 1800s, right, you had this split existing there where some people would be initiated into the moderns and other people would be initiated into the ancients, right? And so putting that practice of the Grand Lodge into place um, was what kind of allowed Freemasonry to survive in Canada, because you had so many fragmented lodges, right, that didn't recognize one another. And then this allowed more unity in where it could kind of flourish, and then they could more support each other instead of being divided, right? And we actually not then see York Rite Freemasonry making its way into the northern United States, mostly through Canada.
Mm.
But
Okay,
yeah, that's a little bit of a rundown.
that's pretty cool. It almost like what alchemy did with their thing, where the Freemasons went from shaping the stone to shaping and refining the self.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
Very similarly, like how alchemy went from working with all these different materials and transmuting them, transferring over to transmuting the self into a finer material.
Yeah, that is a very apt comparison, and I think that's 100% accurate. It's one of these things that kind of becomes a dying art in terms of how it's practically used in the material world. But then there are those who find its uses and then realize that this is a very valid way of improving the self. And so, thusly, you
Mm.
see a lot of alchemy symbolism in Freemasonry too. There's a lot of zodiacal stuff, astrology related stuff that you would see in Freemasonry. A lot of alchemical stuff, a lot of hermetic stuff. Yeah.
That's cool. Um, how long have you been a Freemason for?
Just a couple years. So I guess maybe I should back up a little bit. I wasn't always into the esoteric stuff. When I was um, a young adult, I was kind of more an atheist, but I don't really want to say that. I was I was very convinced by atheism's arguments in terms of deprogramming my religious upbringing,
Mm.
um, and breaking free of some of those limiting beliefs that kind of kept me fearful. Um, and then, but I wasn't. I had experiences, like mystical experiences as a teenager, and I didn't know how to reconcile those with atheism. Is that I knew I saw something, but I didn't know how that worked or what that was. And so, as a young adult, I then kind of got into the exploration of this left hand path kind of um, magical system.
Mm.
And I spent a couple years on that and learned a lot. And I loved my time in that. And I still a big part of me today. Um, but at the end of that journey, I then was wondering what the next thing in my life is going to look like. And up to that point, I'd mostly been doing left hand path type stuff. And then that's when Freemasonry came into the picture for me, just all of a sudden. Like, I didn't know about Freemasonry at all during my time during doing left hand path stuff. That was mostly by myself. And then this came into my life, and I didn't know how much I needed it until I was part of it. There is definitely a huge fraternalism aspect to Freemasonry, and a lot of people come to it just for that. But for someone like myself and like you, um, I am so focused on, uh, learning more about magical stuff and these more esoteric practices. That was my main focus. Is like, hey, I'm here to do the great work, you know. Um, and while I got that out of Freemasonry and still do, um, I didn't realize how much I needed the other aspects that Freemasonry offers. Because a lot of people come to Freemasonry for their own reasons, right? Like, either it's like, oh, my dad was a Mason, my grandpa was a Mason, or I'm doing the family thing, or I'm looking for people who are good people that I can, spend quality time with. And then you got other weirdos like myself who are like, I'm here for the ancient mysteries, but whatever it is that you come into Freemasonry for, if you're open to what it has to show you, it will show you all its aspects, and you will realize that what you didn't think you needed was also part of that experience that you now need. And yeah, it's great to have that fraternalism. It's also great to have all of those great charitable works and stuff like that. But it's also great to do what I came there to do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of it seems like the like you said, it's the great work where you're almost kind of going through this to become the greatest version of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
And so the lore of Freemasonry is revolving around King Solomon's Temple, the story of that. Now, what was really interesting back then, and I should be clear, I don't speak for Masons here, I'm just speaking for myself, is that when I was doing the left hand path stuff, I started with books like the Ars Goetia and stuff like that, right? And I knew
Right.
it was part of this Solomonic tradition, but I didn't really know what that meant. Even delving into it. Like, I had great experiences with stuff in that, and still do to this day, but I didn't realize to the full extent of the whole tradition surrounding this. Now, bear in mind, Freemasonry is a little part of it, but it definitely is an aspect of it, to be sure. And I didn't really know that about Freemasonry before I joined. And so when I'm learning about, oh, the allegory of the story of Freemasonry is the building of King Solomon's Temple, I'm like, oh, and then some of the lessons I'm learning in Freemasonry and what I've read in the Ars Goetia about certain spirits and stuff, I'm like, oh, this is really interesting.
Hmm. Yeah. So Freemasonry, and like I guess you specifically, like you follow this Solomonic tradition. How like, I guess my question is, how do you like incorporate the teachings of Freemasonry into your spirituality?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Um, so when I was doing the more left-hand path stuff, I was working with one spirit named Prince Stolas. And back then, I was doing a working with him where he asked me if I could do a sacrifice of time. And I asked him the details about what he's looking for. And one of them was, uh, if you want, you can, to fulfill this, you can share what you know, and you can share uh, your insights to help guide people. Because back then, on the left hand path stuff, at one point, I was offering services and stuff like that. So mostly mentorship and stuff like that. The occasional ritual for client and stuff like that. And those were good times. I don't do them anymore, um, just because of the where I'm at in life. I'd rather help people help themselves, you know. Um,
Right.
but yeah, if someone like really needed something and I felt like it was achievable within certain parameters, I definitely would do it. I wouldn't say no, but that was back then. And so with Prince Stolas, it was to offer this stuff I was doing for free. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna put out an announcement. I'm gonna book this whole day off, and just say, hey, anybody who wants, you can pop in for free. And so that was my first kind of brush with Freemasonry, but I didn't even know it at the time. And then when I joined Freemasonry and was starting to learn about its principles and stuff, I realized that beings like Prince Stolas especially, was guiding me towards this current, like priming me for it. Um,
Hmm.
and so the virtues, of course, of um, brotherly love, truth, and relief are now very big parts of what make me who I am. Now, I can't get into all the details about how Freemasonry's teachings affect my spirituality, but to a fellow member, I could definitely get into that topic. But
Sure, sure.
let's just say seeking a further light is something I'm always going to be doing.
That's awesome. So say someone wanted to get into Freemasonry, how would one do so?
Yeah, so it would depend on your jurisdiction. Usually, how it works is wherever you live, there's going to be what's called a Grand Lodge. So,
Hmm.
for example, where I live in my province, there is the Grand Lodge of my province. In some cases, for smaller countries and stuff like that, they'll just have, like Japan, for example, they will just have the Grand Lodge of Japan, right? Um, so, what that means is under the Grand Lodge, they have a charter which they recognize. It's basically their jurisdiction, right, for where they claim. And any lodge in that jurisdiction will be under that Grand Lodge, meaning that you have the right, basically, once you're a member, to travel to any lodge in your jurisdiction and participate there as you wish. Now, it might vary a little bit jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but uh, yeah, basically, more or less, once you're a member, you kind of have the ability to travel anywhere in the world and attend a lodge if you want to. There are a couple of regulations surrounding that, but you'd learn more about that once you joined. In terms of joining, to be one, just ask a Freemason. If you can find one, ask them. If you don't know any Freemasons like I did when I joined, I would check to see your area. So, like, let's say you lived in Oregon or Washington, right? I would check to see if there's a Grand Lodge where you live, and they'll probably have a website and a way to get in contact with them. And I imagine that they would reach out to you and then have someone call you. And of course, they're going to vet you a little bit first of like, hey, why do you want to join?
Sure.
Because they don't want
Right.
just anybody walking in there like who has bad intentions, right?
Right.
But yeah, if they see that you're a good person and whatever, right? They'll definitely put you in contact with some lodges in your area that you might be interested in attending. And then once you get in contact with some of these lodges, it will be basically kind of visiting them when they're out of their lodge meetings. So usually what they have what's called the festive board, where usually either before or after the meeting, they'll have dinner and they'll have some drinks and whatever, right? And then during that time, you can get invited to visit that lodge when they're meeting, and you can ask them questions and stuff like that. They can get to know you a little bit more. And then when you're ready, you would have to find, at least in my jurisdiction, you would have to find 2 Masons of the lodge you want to attend and have them sign for you. You'll have a petition, basically. And if they vouch for you, they'll sign for you. And then what will happen is you'll get balloted upon. And there's some very interesting esoteric symbolism with the balloting that I wish I could talk about. But yeah, you'll get balloted on, and then if you're favorable, then you'll get your scheduled for your first degree.
Okay. From my knowledge of Freemasonry, my knowledge comes from like that of the founding fathers of the United States.
Yeah.
What's the relation there?
Yeah, so during and in my limited historical knowledge, when America was founded with the colonies and so on and so forth, a lot of the people that came over were admittedly doomsday cultists. They were certain at that time that the world was going to end, and the rise of America and the rise of the new world here kind of meant that the world was coming to an end, and then the biblical prophecies are about to be fulfilled and whatever, right?
End time shit.
Yeah, right. And you can kind of see how in America today that hasn't changed at all. It's very much part of our culture that the world's always going to end. You know, it's what makes us American. And then yeah, so the founding fathers, obviously, several of them obviously would have come from England. And of course, as we kind of talked about in the beginning, in the 1700s was the formation of the first official Grand Lodge in London, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's these things of, you know, becoming a better man, becoming a better person, working on yourself, and the pursuit of that mixed with this element of fraternalism and brotherhood that, especially in the days before the internet, I can imagine that having a community like that to be a part of would have been a big thing to have in your life. And thusly, we see as America expanded that you go to basically any town in America, and the city center is going to have a Masonic lodge. So whenever towns were getting formed, it was usually people who were coming to set up the town, like the lawyers and whoever, right? Like skilled tradespeople and whatever, right? These people were all Masons, right? And so oftentimes, again, like in these smaller towns and stuff, and even the main cities, you're going to see these Masonic lodges within a close proximity to the downtown core or the city hall, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's actually a lodge a couple towns over from me in one of the major cities. I always found it pretty interesting.
Yeah. And so I guess I should get into a little bit of what the structure of Freemasonry, because I'm sure
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
your listeners would like to hear.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so Freemasonry often, when we talk about it, is denoted by what's called the Blue Lodge. Um, these are the 3 degrees in Freemasonry. Now, you probably have heard that, like, oh, Scottish Rite, 33rd degree, and whatever, right?
Sounds
Officially,
vaguely familiar.
yeah. Officially, there's only 3 degrees in Freemasonry. Um, there is the degree of an entered apprentice, where this is a degree of the teaching of faith. And how I would describe this degree is kind of like how you are when you start a new job, like, or start a new career, right? You don't know much. You need to have faith in this process. You don't want to lean on your own understanding. And sure, at some times it can feel like, you're the bottom peon. Though in Freemasonry, I should be clear, no one's going to make you feel like that. But in terms of how much you know compared to other people, especially if you're brand new, you're going to feel kind of like at the bottom, right? And so this first degree is all about faith. And it's a lot about trust and uh, learning to take in information and walk the path, right? The Fellowcraft
Mm.
degree is one that oftentimes gets overlooked, but by people who are into the esoteric stuff, this is probably people's favorite degree of people who are into esoteric stuff. In the Fellowcraft degree, you have experience now. You've learned what it means to have faith, and now there are new information and new stuff is starting to come at you as you're learning to take on more responsibility. There's new opportunities for you to grow, and so to face these challenges, you've already learned these lessons of faith, but now you're beginning to understand. In each step you take in this degree, you're starting to understand more and more and more. And it's
Mm.
absolutely gorgeous degree. It's probably my favorite, though Master Mason's probably everybody's favorite, but Fellowcraft has a really special place in my heart. Um, then the third degree, the infamous one. This one, if we've learned from the first degree that we need to have faith, in the second degree we learn that um, that as we hope, we begin to understand, but only the master really knows. And until you know, yeah, that's really all I can say is just that beautiful silence. I'm reminded of Golden Dawn and stuff, right? Where it talks about um, the Supreme One who not but silence can express, right? It is
Right.
this silence, and if you know, when you know, you know.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, the 3 degrees are so beautiful, and there's a famous joke that uh, while there's other stuff beyond the first 3 degrees, it's the famous joke is that anything beyond the third degree is for people who didn't understand the first 3. And I'm kind of serious about that. I just completed what's called Royal Arch, and it's supposed to be historically the completion of the Master Mason degree. Um, and while it was absolutely beautiful, if you know what you're looking for, everything really is in the first 3 degrees. Um, like when you know, you know. Um, so yeah, typically there's 2 branches of learning after the third degree. Once you're a Master Mason, you can either apply to what's called the York Rite or the Scottish Rite. Now, in the York Rite, um, this one is more English, and it kind of came more out of Canada into the United States, into the northern United States, I should say. Whereas the Scottish Rite, if I remember correctly, it came out of France, but it got very popular in the southern United States. So you'll probably see people who are, of course, in the southern states be really big into Scottish Rite Freemasonry because of that. Um,
It's kind of deceiving. The Scottish Rite coming out of
yeah,
France.
yeah. Um,
Um,
so the York Rite is divided into four bodies, four lodges, if you will. So everyone starts in the Blue Lodge, and you get the first 3 degrees of Masonry, like the only 3 degrees there are technically, right? Beyond that, in the York Rite, the next one would be called the Royal Arch or the Holy Royal Arch, and in these degrees, you get a little bit more of an exploration into some more of the teachings of the first 3 degrees, and you discover something that was lost in the third degree. Absolutely beautiful. I just completed Royal Arch. It's gorgeous. After that is technically an optional, depending on your jurisdiction, an optional body called Cryptic Rite. And now I don't know too much about those teachings yet because I haven't done it. I will at some point here, but technically it's optional. But I will not be skipping it. And then the final body of the York Rite is called Preceptory, or it's the Knights Templar. So instead of
right.
3 degrees in that body, there are 3 orders that you are part of. So 3 different knighthoods, technically, of the Crusaders. And I've heard that those degrees, if you want to call them that, are pretty Gnostic. So I'm pretty interested to see what those are like. On the other side of where you can go, and you can be part of all of these if you have the time and money to be part of them all. The other side of this is the Scottish Rite. Now, instead of having individual bodies that you join per se, you instead go through additional degrees. So you go through what's called the 4th through the 32nd degree in Scottish Rite. But they're broken into, just like the York Rite, into 3 bodies technically, right? So the first one you would join would be degrees 4 through 14, which is called the Lodge of Perfection. And there's some interesting similarities, but also very stark differences between the logo of Lodge of Perfection and Royal Arch. Then degrees 15 through 19, I believe, are called Rose Croix. And I've heard that these degrees differ a little bit compared to the York Rite. It's not exactly parallel to Cryptic Rite, where you can do these degrees after you've done the Royal Arch. In these ones, I've heard after you complete the Lodge of Perfection to advance through 15 through 19, you can only receive these degrees during Easter. And then 20 through 32, I believe, is the Commandery. So basically kind of like the Knights Templar in name. And then if you look at any structure chart of how Freemasonry is organized, while they teach very different things and kind of come to teaching things a little bit differently, they both are kind of recognized. The 32nd degree Scottish Rite is kind of equivalent to a Knights Templar in the York Rite. Now, there is famously the 33rd degree in Scottish Rite, but this one technically doesn't exist. It is a honorary kind of degree that is conferred upon someone who's done a lot of service to the body of the Scottish Rite, for example, right?
You said you mentioned this to me before, how you went over you underwent this ceremony, the Royal Arch. You said this was you reaching that master degree?
Yeah, so after you become a Master Mason in Blue Lodge, you have the option, if you want to continue your education with what are called the honorary degrees. They don't make you any higher. Everyone's a Master Mason. They're just additional learning you can do if you want to. And historically, Royal Arch is considered the completion of the Master Mason degree. It gets into kind of wrapping up the story of King Solomon's Temple, if you will.
Okay.
And they're absolutely beautiful. So if you join Freemasonry and you have the time, Royal Arch is definitely worth it if you can spare it. If it's within your cable toe, as we say.
How was your experience with that? I wanted to hear about that.
Yeah, it's a little hard to describe to someone who hasn't been through Freemasonry, but yeah, it's they delve into some additional teachings regarding the second degree and the first degree, arguably as well. Um, and finally, they expand a little bit more on the third degree with the final degree, the Royal Arch degree. Um, it's a very different vibe than, well, not tremendously so. It's a bit more of a more relaxed environment than kind of how strict we can be with Blue Lodge. But it is, especially the body or the chapter I'm a part of, it's full of like all the heavy hitter names in Freemasonry. So when I joined, I was kind of intimidated because I'm like, oh, I know these guys. They got like big resumes when it comes to Freemasonry and what they've done and served in, right? So it was a real honor in that way to be part of that chapter, or to be part of it, sorry. Um, but yeah, it definitely leans more into the alchemical symbolism, I find, than even Blue Lodge does. Um, and it was interesting. I'm kind of doing also on the side some of the Golden Dawn stuff as well. So having learned some of those lessons from the Golden Dawn already, it was really interesting to see some of that reflected in ways I wasn't expecting when it came to
Hmm.
Royal Arch. Um, yeah,
Wow. Hmm. It's interesting. Now I remember you mentioned to me, and you're welcome to share as much as you're comfortable with. You did a ritual with King Paimon recently, so you do still interact with entities of the Goetia.
yes, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Um, how do you? I don't know if you're able to share this, but
Yeah,
how do you like I guess incorporate what you learned from Freemasonry into these rituals that you perform with spirits that many of the left hand path interact with? Uh, do you do it in a more ceremonial sense, like more of a Solomonic sense, perhaps, uh, where it's very more professionally done as opposed to simply drawing a sigil, saying an incantation? How does that work?
yeah. So I guess before I answer that question, I should delineate or differentiate between uh, the esoteric magical practice, if you will, of how the ritual magic of Freemasonry versus um, kind of this more left hand path stuff. So, to be more precise, the so called ritual magic uh, of Freemasonry is not quite like what you've probably read of the traditional Solomonic style invocations and stuff like that, right?
Okay.
Instead, what Freemasonry is their ritual magic is designed specifically to give you a mystical experience if you're open to it, and in that confer a lesson to you. So, what I like to say now is that you have kind of more, on one hand, a chaos kind of style magic, where kind of like what you're talking about, of where you can just draw a sigil and so on and so forth. Then there's the more ceremonial style, which is more what we would think of the Solomonic type stuff and very more formal. Um, Then there are what are called degree style, what I like to call. They're useful for different things. Chaos magic kind of style is very much more fast and easy, but you got to be more in tune in order to grasp everything there. Whereas with the more formal style, everything has already been done and charged for you. And if you repeat it, and it's admittedly a lot more slower than the more chaos magic style, but as you repeat it, you ramp up in a way, right? Um,
Hmm.
the degree style is very different than the other two, where this one's not necessarily concerned about. Well, you can have elements if you wanted to. In not talking about Freemasonry here, but like let's say you were to start your own coven or something like that, right? If there was a ritual for initiation, for example, right, you could incorporate elements where you do the invocation of spirits and stuff like that, but those would be elements of a more grander thing where you're not focused entirely with communing with the spirit per se, like everyone involved. You're more trying to guide the person going through it through a journey, and what they experience along the way is for them. So it's a little different, but in terms of genre, it's not aiming at the same thing as like the difference between chaos and more standard ritual magic, right? Um,
Hmm.
so in terms of going back to what you were asking about, how do I interact with like the goetics and stuff now? Um, Now that I kind of have this experience of both the left and right hand path, there are elements of each that I find useful and are definitely um, part of me now. Where I do see the value now, which I didn't back then, of uh, setting up the elements of like of how should I say, of putting your energy and focus towards this grand goal and planning something out. But then once you've planned out what you're going to do, once you've done, when the time comes for the ritual, when you've done everything that was planned, then there's a free form period of doing the more chaos kind of style stuff, and then closing with the more structured kind of stuff. You kind of get the benefits of both with that one. Now, what I would say to someone who's a Mason, now I don't see him this way per se, just based off the experiences I've had and my history with working with these beings. But what I would say to someone who's a Mason and would be looking into this other part of the lore of King Solomon, namely the 72 demons and stuff like that. What I would say from a more Masonic perspective is every tradition has its form of shadow work, right? And for Freemasonry, I think the Mason might get some benefit out of seeing what King Solomon did with these beings. That he didn't, he called them all before him and he learned their names and he learned their offices, right? And instead of casting them away, he put them to work to serve a higher purpose. And
Hmm.
I'm reminded of that famous saying, "The idle hands are the devil's playground," or whatever, right?
Right.
And if we think of it kind of like that, and we're incorporating that part of the lore into the more Masonic stuff, I think an individual Mason could see that, oh, I might get some value out of kind of, at the very least, looking at these 72 beings as a form of shadow work, right? Realizing that, and there are lessons in Freemasonry alluding to this as well, I will say, but knowing what you are, that there, you are checkered with so called good and evil, and knowing that these things are part of you, rather than trying to cast them aside, you realize you're all these things, and rather than trying to shun something that you think is bad, how can you find a way to make it serve a higher purpose? How can you make it work for you, you know?
It's not about denial, it's about integration.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm. Mm. Now, these questions are coming right off the dome, coming right from the head. I don't got no script.
Yeah.
I guess my final question would be, who would you say Freemasonry is for?
It is for the person who wants to be around good people, who knows that there's more than what you've been raised with and conditioned with in the material world, and someone who is seeking to better themselves. That was who Freemasonry is for.
I think we could all use a bit of that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh man,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
yeah. It's a beautiful tradition. It's not for everybody.
Sure.
It's to be fair, it's pretty suit and tie, no pun intended. Um, but there's a lot of value in it, and when you look back at all these people like Manly P. Hall and so on and so forth, right? These people all eventually at some point were Freemasons. And now I'm not saying it's like the best tradition. For better or worse, it's the Western mystery tradition. And I think a lot of people who go down this path of magic and esotericism at some point will find themselves touching on Freemasonry.
That's awesome. Yeah, Freemasonry sounds like a powerful, beautiful way of life, and a great way to commune with others who are of a similar mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'd like to say about Freemasonry is while you're while I was kind of hesitant at first on the left-hand path of joining anything or doing stuff with other people, Freemasonry kind of shattered that expectation for me. And what I found is it's all about you. And while you're meeting with other people, you're really meeting with other people who are on the path. They are doing their own thing in their life, whatever that looks like for them, and you are doing your own thing. But you're having this monthly convocation where you meet and you have this experience where you recognize the work that each of you are doing, the great work that you're doing.
Wow, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's all I got for now. I really want to thank you for coming on and chatting with me. I've definitely learned a lot here about Freemasonry. It's very interesting.
Thank you so much for having me, and hopefully we could have another talk sometime. I had a great time.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. All right. Thanks, man.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.